Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. It's a beautiful Wednesday evening. We're going to do some exciting learning tonight together. I'm having some Facebook difficulty. Hopefully, let me see if I can get this figured out. For some reason, I can't see today's video so that I can welcome everybody who's watching. I can see that people are watching, but I can't get into the comments. What is with Facebook, man? Let me just try one more thing with switching browser to Chrome. And then if I can't get it, I can't get it. Sometimes we just have to accept that, you know, the internet doesn't cooperate the way we would have it cooperate. Okay. Let's see. I need to sign in over here. I can't. It's just not going to work. That's not working. This is so frustrating. I don't know what's up with Facebook. All right. Anyway, I'm so glad that you're watching. Hopefully Nina can see comments and she's going to let me know who is watching. And when I get to comments and questions later, YouTube is working in terms of comments, so welcome Neil in Virginia and Gigi in British Columbia. I don't know what to say. I can see some of the comments, like just 4 or 5 at a time, but I can't open the video. Very, very frustrating. And I can see that 32 comments have come in. I just don't see where they are. Just the last few. I can see Emerald Thunder and Ann from Merced and Jim saying howdy on Facebook, and Jamal Tulak. Anyway, welcome everybody. It's great to have you with us. Hopefully these glitches will get worked out. I can see that 95 people are watching. Probably the more trouble I'm having, the more interesting the show gets. All right, let's get busy. First of all, we want to thank Melissa Eitel-Jurin. She's sponsoring tonight's class in memory of my beloved parents, Ruth and Jack Eiteld, who passed away in 2012. May the memories of Ruth and Jack Eiteld always be for a blessing, and may their neshamas, may their souls have a great elevation in the world of souls, and may our learning today, the merit of our learning, resound to their credit and take them even higher in the world of souls. And we say amen. And Melissa, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings from heaven. Thank you for sponsoring tonight's episode and donating to our nonprofit. It helps us in the work that we do, sharing Torah with the world. And we say amen. All right. Oh, hey. Let's light up the darkness. I'm so verklempt that I can't see comments. All right. All right, let's see. And Nina, you can communicate to me the regular way, so you'll let me know if you can see people's comments or not. I'll check back on that a little later. Okay, where are we? So we are on Daf Samech Zayin. That's page 67 here in Tractate Pesachim, the 4th volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. We're in chapter 6, continuing our discussion of the first Mishnah. This has to do, the discussion of the Mishnah, generally speaking, is that bringing the Korban Pesach, bringing the Paschal lamb, the Passover offering, when the temple is standing in Jerusalem, overrides Shabbos, meaning that we will slaughter the lamb on the afternoon of the 14th of the Hebrew month of Nisan, even if that afternoon, the afternoon before Passover begins that night, falls on Shabbos. So we learned that yesterday. Now we're continuing that discussion. We're starting to digress a little bit. And what we're going to see is that the question that's being asked is, okay, so the laws of bringing the Paschal offering can override Shabbos. Will they override other kinds of restrictions? For example, a person who's in a state of ritual impurity, that he's tamei, right? And you can become tamei there's a lot of different things that can cause a person to be ritually impure, varying from they come into contact with a dead sheretz, a dead creeping thing, or they come into contact with a dead human. A human corpse is probably the strongest form of ritual impurity. Or they have some kind of bodily emission. It can be a seminal emission. It can be a nocturnal emission. If a man has gonorrhea, it could be a different kind of emission. Or it could be a mitzora. It could be somebody who has, it's often translated as leprosy. In the Bible, it's not leprosy the way we understand it. It's a spiritual condition that no longer exists, that is manifest in a physical way. And that's called sara'as, right? So this was understood to be that, you know, there was some way in which you had strayed spiritually, and you did that repeatedly over time, and eventually there would be like a breakout in your skin, and then you'd have to go through a purification process. It was a kind of a blessing, actually, that when you kind of strayed from the path so much that there would be this outbreak on your skin that would cause you to stop, just stop and say, where am I in my life? What have I been doing? Have I been speaking lashon hara? Have I been speaking with a wicked tongue about other people, being a gossip monger, telling lies, doing all kinds of things like that that could lead to tzara'as. And that would also cause a person to be ritually impure. The importance of being ritually impure is you're not allowed to enter the temple. And in fact, depending on the kind of ritual impurity, you may not even be allowed to go into the Temple Mount. You may not even be able to enter Jerusalem, right? These days, these laws are much more for studying than for practical. We understand that the whole world is tamei now. It's like nobody is really in a state of purity anymore. We don't know where dead bodies are buried. We don't have the ashes of the red heifer for people that have come into contact with a human corpse to be sprinkled with the water, mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. There's just many, many ways. And truthfully, it just doesn't matter that much anymore because the temple is not standing. So we don't have the concern that we're ritually impure and cannot enter the temple. We don't separate teruma, the tithe that belongs to the priest. The priest could only eat that in a state of ritual purity and tahara. And if you touch the teruma and you were impure, you would cause the teruma, the priest's tithe, to become impure, and then he wouldn't be able to eat it. But we don't do that anymore. So there's so many aspects of these laws that are no longer applicable in a practical way in this world, but we still study them and study them carefully. And we're going to get into that a little bit today. I anticipate that today's class is going to be somewhat short because I'm the way we do the Daf Yomi in this class, the way that I teach the pages of the Talmud is not to teach the entire page. I try to share the highlights of the page, the stuff that's going to be interesting and applicable and accessible to our audience. And then if I find something really interesting, I'll dive in and go deeper on that, or sometimes go into the lives of the sages. This particular page, if this material interests you, you should absolutely read it carefully. But it would be difficult to teach in this context about all the different kinds of, liquid emissions from human beings and what they mean and how much tumah they cause and the various levels of ritual impurity. So we're going to do the highlights of this page. And I anticipate that today's class will be a little bit on the short side. But we'll see. I've thought that before and been wrong. So let us see. Okay, we are starting at the bottom of page 66b. So we've been discussing this idea of the Paschal lamb, bringing the Paschal offering in Jerusalem on the first day of Passover. or the afternoon before Passover begins, and that it overrides even Shabbos, the restrictions of Shabbos. So says the Gemara, we have found proofs that the daily offering, right, the daily offering in the temple, there was a morning offering and an afternoon offering, and on Shabbos there was an additional 2 offerings called the additional offering of Shabbos. Let me move this. So we have found proofs that the daily offering and the Paschal lamb override Shabbos. From where do we derive that they also override tumah, ritual impurity? For we have a tradition that if the entire community is ritually impure, they nonetheless offer the communal sacrifices and the Paschal lamb. Right? So you can't enter the temple if you're tamei, if you're in a state of ritual impurity. And so an individual or a small group of individuals, if they're tamei, they're not going to be able to bring the Paschal lamb. They're not going to be able to fulfill that obligation of bringing the Paschal lamb and offering it in the temple and then eating it roasted that night. If they're in a state of ritual impurity, it's off limits to them. And in fact, that's why we have Pesach Sheni, the second Passover that occurs a month later, just for individuals who were in a state of tumah during Passover or who were so far away that they couldn't get to Jerusalem to bring the offering at Passover. So there's a second Passover for them. However, as we're going to learn here, if the whole Jewish people is tamei, or at least more than half, if the majority of them are tamei, then we bring the offering anyway, even though they're in a state of ritual impurity. If more than half the Jewish people are in that state, we would bring the offering. So if the temple were standing today, we would bring it, even though all of us are tamei, but the temple's not here. When the third temple comes, which is to say when the Messiah comes, our tradition says that the temple will be built by God, so it'll go up in a day, it'll be immediate, and then we'll see what's going to happen with the offerings at that time. All right, but here we're just talking about the law that if the majority of the Jewish people are tamei, we still nevertheless bring the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb. So they say, just as the law governing the Paschal lamb is derived from the law governing the daily offering in regard to overriding Shabbos, so too the law concerning the daily offering is derived from the law concerning the Paschal lamb with regard to ritual impurity. Just as the Paschal lamb overrides communal impurity, right? So if the whole nation is impure, at least the majority, we bring the Paschal lamb, so too we bring the daily offering, the tamei. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the Paschal lamb itself, from where do we derive that if most of the nation is ritually impure, that the sacrifice is offered anyway? Rabbi Yochanan said, for the verse states, speak to the children of Israel, saying, any man of you or your generations who shall be impure by reason of a corpse, right, tamei, by reason of touching a human corpse, or on a distant journey, he shall keep the Passover of the Lord on the 14th day of the second month. At evening they shall keep it and eat it with matzos and bitter herbs. That verse is Numbers 9, 10, and 11. Right? So that's Pesach Sheni. That's bringing it a month later because you were tamei. What it specifies in the Torah is by reason of touching a corpse, meaning you attended to the dead, you went to bury somebody, you took care of the needs of the dead. Are you going to be penalized that you can't participate in the Passover sacrifice? You can't at the time that the sacrifice is brought, but you can do it a month later. Likewise, if you're on the road, specifically if you're fulfilling a mitzvah errand, but if you're simply away and you can't get back in time, you're going to have that second chance to participate in the Passover. Where am I? So we can infer from here, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that a single individual or a group of individuals are deferred to Pesach Sheni, are deferred to the second Passover if they are ritually impure. But the entire community or the majority thereof is not deferred to the second Passover. Rather, they observe the first Passover in their state of ritual impurity. We skip over to sort of like a third of the way down, page 67. And here we're gonna understand. First, I'm going to give a little bit of background. I'm going to read Rav Steinsaltz's note about the three camps. Right, so we should understand that there were three camps, and there's this idea that the three camps in the wilderness have analogues in the kingdom of Israel and Judea later, and that there are sort of differing levels of sanctity in the camp, and that these transfer to Jerusalem later when the temple is established. So what does this mean? When the children of Israel leave Egypt, right? So God takes us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with miracles and wonders, signs and wonders, right? The 10 plagues, and then the parting of the sea, and then we're out in the wilderness, and then eventually we get all the commands relating to the Mishkan, the tabernacle. So then we build the tabernacle in the desert, and that is where the priests, the Kohanim, will officiate and bring the sacrifices and burn the daily incense, and put out the showbreads on the table of the showbreads, and light the menorah, the candelabra every day, so that the Jews can be a light unto the world, right? Specifically, that's from the candelabra. So that's the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Eventually, the tabernacle will be replaced by the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So the tabernacle is the equivalent of the temple. Around the tabernacle, in the encampment of the children of Israel in the wilderness, is the camp of the Levites, or the Levi'im in Hebrew. So the Levites surround the tabernacle. Recall that there's 12 tribes, right? There's actually 13 tribes because Joseph becomes 2 tribes. Ephraim and Manasseh, his 2 sons, become their own tribes. And so there's an array of the children of Israel encamped in the wilderness for 40 years. It was meant to be about 2 years. We misbehaved. It became 40 years. And then there's this array in the wilderness where there's 3 tribes in the north, 3 tribes in the east, 3 tribes in the south, 3 tribes in the west. And in the middle, one more tribe, the Levites, and they surround the tabernacle. So in terms of levels of sanctity, the tabernacle is, of course, the highest level of holiness. Then the camp of the Levites is a little bit lower in terms of holiness, right? It's not quite as holy as the tabernacle. Of course, even within the tabernacle, there's going to be the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant is stored. But for right now, we're just talking about the camps. So there's the camp of the tabernacle, the camp of the Levites, then the camp of the Israelites, right? So all the 12 tribes that surround the Levites, that's the encampment of Israel, and then beyond, right? So then beyond is outside the camp. And certain people, because of their tumah, like for example, a mitzora, somebody with this tsaras malady, right, that where the skin erupts as a physical manifestation of that spiritual malady, the Torah says that person needs to be removed outside the camp, and they're going to be in isolation until the days of their tzara'as pass, and then they go through a purification process, and then they can come back inside the camp. And so we're going to be talking about those camps and their levels of sanctity and how it plays out in terms of who is allowed in which camp depending on what kind of ritual impurity they have. So let's read this note. Various halachos, various laws, are derived from the Torah's account of the activities of the Jews in the wilderness. The halachic discussions, the legal discussions of these topics, use terms appropriate for the situation in that era, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, despite the fact that they are no longer relevant to the later period. Examples of this phenomenon can also be found in the laws of Shabbos. Halachic discussions with regard to the areas into which the different classes of ritually impure people are forbidden entry adopt the terminology used to describe the camps of Israel in the wilderness, as I've just explained. The three camps in the wilderness had parallels in the land of Israel in later periods. The camp of the divine presence, the area within the courtyard of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, was paralleled by the temple and its courtyard inside the gate of Nicanor. Right, so the temple itself, once it was built by Solomon in Jerusalem, there was the sanctuary, there's the inner courtyard, then there's the gate of Nicanor, and then there's the outer courtyard. So it's that inner courtyard and the sanctuary that correspond to the tabernacle. That outer courtyard goes along with the rest of the Temple Mount, and that's parallel to the camp of the Levites, right? The camp of the Levites, the area where the Levites encamped around the tabernacle, was paralleled by the Temple Mount as far as the gate of Nicanor, and the camp of Israel was paralleled by the city of Jerusalem, outside the Temple Mount, and according to many authorities, all walled cities in the land of Israel, because those were essentially the Levite cities, right? The Levites were not given portions of land around the land of Israel. They would dwell in the cities, and specifically the walled cities. It should be noted that this division into three camps represents the different levels of sanctity of place with respect to ritual impurity according to Torah law. The sages subdivided these areas further and differentiated within the Temple Mount between the different courtyards, the ramparts, and the like. All right, so that's a little bit of background. Now we can understand a little better when the Gemara says, having cited verses dealing with the requirement to send out the ritually impure from the camp, the Gemara addresses several halachas, several laws relevant to that topic. Rav Chisda said, a leper, again, this is the mitzora, right? So this is somebody suffering from tzara'as, not the modern disease of leprosy, who must be sent out from all the camps, including the Israelite camp, who went in beyond his boundary, right? So the Mitzorah needs to leave the camp, needs to dwell in isolation until that malady passes, and then he or she can return to the camp. So what if they do return when they're not supposed to be there? What is the punishment for that? They violated a negative commandment in the Torah, so do they get lashes for that? Do they get charis, death at the hands of the heavenly court? What is the punishment? Interestingly, no punishment, and we'll explain why. So the Metzora, who must be sent out from all the camps, including the Israelite camp, who went in nevertheless beyond his boundary, that is, he entered an area that is prohibited to him, is nonetheless exempt from the punishment of lashes. With regard to the ritually impure, the Torah states, both male and female shall you send out. Outside the camp shall you send them, and they shall not defile their camps in the midst of which I dwell. Meaning the Lord dwells in the encampment of Israel. When we're wandering in the wilderness, there was that pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night, which was the very presence. It was a manifestation of the presence of the Lord in the camp of Israel. And so because God is visibly among us. I mean, of course, we're in God. God is everywhere. But when God chooses to make a manifestation like that, it's understood that that whole campment has to be treated like a place of sanctity. And that means there's no place for these, these express manifestations of tumah, of ritual impurity. They need to be outside the camp. Where am I? In the midst of which I dwell, from which we learn that an impure person who enters the camp is liable to receive lashes for having violated the prohibition, they shall not defile. A mitzorah, however, right? So that's any tamei person. But the mitzorah is exempt, right? So this is a very strong form of ritual impurity. He's already been told he can't be in the camp at all. He needs to be sent out and dwell in isolation. But other kinds of people with other kinds of tumah, they touched a corpse. Well, corpse, let's not talk about. They touched a sheretz. They had, some kind of emissions, even a seminal emission, because they had marital relations, and they're supposed to go through a purification process. They can't be in the camp. But the mitzorah, who's a very strong form of tumah, So if those people enter the camp when they are tamei, they get lashes. The Mitzorah, who has a stronger form of tumah, if they enter the camp, they don't receive lashes. Why? A Mitzorah, however, is exempt, as it is stated, all the days that the plague shall be in him, he shall be impure. He is impure. He shall dwell in isolation. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. That's Leviticus 13:46. The Gemara explains that the verse is explicated in the following manner. He shall dwell in isolation means he shall dwell alone, and without even the company of others who are tamei, others who are ritually impure. His dwelling shall be outside the camp, teaches that the verse has transmuted the negative commandment into a positive commandment. The negative commandment is he shall not defile the encampment. He shall not defile the camp, right? He shall not be in the camp when he is in the state of being a Mitzorah. But now there's a positive commandment. He shall dwell outside, right? Positive commandment is thou shalt. Negative commandments, thou shalt not, right? So now that there is a positive remedy for violating the negative commandment, that in that situation, the sages have found that what would have been a punishment for violating a negative prohibition, for violating a negative commandment, you would have received lashes, because the Torah also includes this remedy, which is a positive commandment. No lashes are administered. And we have that same situation for a thief, right? So if somebody steals, they have obviously violated a negative commandment. Thou shalt not steal, right? You shall not steal. But the Torah says that if you steal, so you have to return what you stole and add a penalty of 20%. That's the positive commandment of how you deal with having stolen something, and that actually takes out the punishment of lashes, because now you have to restore the property and add the penalty, and that's how the Torah deals with that situation. So in other words, the verse establishes that if a Mitzorah entered an area that is prohibited to him, he is commanded to leave. And fulfilling this positive command removes the full force of the prohibition he has already violated. The rule is that lashes are not administered for the violation of a prohibition if that violation can be rectified by fulfillment of a positive commandment. The Rav Steinsaltz explains, this is an instance of the category of negative mitzvahs whose violation can be rectified by the fulfillment of a positive mitzvah. That is to say, the Torah appends to the prohibition a positive command that is meant to correct the consequences of the original violation. What is the law on this question? One who is ritually impure may not enter the Temple Mount. If he does so, he receives lashes. A Mitzorah is punished with lashes for entering Jerusalem, but does not receive lashes for entering other walled cities in the land of Israel, although he is prohibited from doing so. The Rambam ruled in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Shimon in this matter. With regard to one who is ritually impure due to contact with a corpse, that is permitted to enter the Levite camp. So that's unusual, right? So the Mitzorah can't come in. He definitely can't come into any of the encampments. Normally, we would think that tumah, ritual impurity that you derive by touching a corpse, is the strongest form of impurity. So if we already know that the Mitzorah, the one who's suffering from the skin outbreak of tzara'as, he can't enter the camp, you would think that all the more a person who touched a corpse also cannot enter the camp. But actually, the law is one who is ritually impure due to contact with a corpse, and even the corpse itself, are permitted to enter not only the Israelite camp, but even the Levite camp, which is the area which corresponds in Jerusalem to the area of the Temple Mount outside of the temple itself. So you can't enter the temple if you've touched a corpse, but you can enter the Temple Mount even though the one who's a Mitzorah cannot. Why? That seems to be a surprising leniency. Why is it that one who's tamei by virtue of touching a corpse is permitted on the Temple Mount, corresponding to was permitted into the Levite camp in the array of the 13 tribes wandering in the wilderness. Why? And this is the title of our episode today, because Moses brought the bones of Joseph up out of Egypt and kept those bones with him. It's not like every time they set up camp, he went and left the bones of Joseph somewhere outside the camp. He kept the bones of Joseph with him. Eventually, the Moses himself did not make it into the promised land, so it was Joshua who carried those bones of Joseph. Joseph had asked the children of Israel to remember him and to bring his bones up out of Egypt and to be buried in Israel. And eventually that request was fulfilled by Joshua. But in the meantime, Moses had the bones. And so we read, and not only did they say that one who is ritually impure due to a corpse may enter this area, the Levite camp, corresponding to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, but even a corpse itself may be brought into the Levite camp, as it is stated in Exodus 13:19, and Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. The words "with him" implying that the bones were taken within his boundary, meaning his camp, i.e. that Joseph's coffin was found in the same area in which Moses dwelled. Since we know that Moses was a Levite, right? Moses and Aaron were both Levites. Aaron became the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and Aaron's descendants would be the priests, but they're a kind of subgroup of the Levites. Moses and Aaron were both Levites. I'm a Levite, by the way, so are my sons. Where am I? Since Moses was a Levite and lived in the Levite camp, it follows that even a corpse may be brought into the Levite camp. In any event, we see, so that's actually given in passing because it was an additional teaching of Rav Chisda, who was also there to teach that a leper does in fact receive lashes for entering an area prohibited to him against Rav Chisda. So that would seem to indicate that, well, even though there's a positive commandment to dwell in isolation, at least according to this Baraisa, that is brought to disprove Rav Chisda's point that he would not get lashes since he has a positive commandment. In fact, if the Mitzorah enters the Israelite camp or it enters Jerusalem, he does receive lashes. However, he doesn't receive lashes if he goes to other walled cities. So it's kind of like half right, half wrong there. The Gemara answers, this is a matter that is subject to dispute between Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishna. For it was taught in a different Baraisa, he shall dwell in isolation, indicates that he shall dwell alone, meaning that the other ritually impure people, such as the Zavin, the man who has gonorrhea, and those who are ritually impure due to contact with the corpse, should not dwell with him, right? So you might think that everyone who's tamei, who's not permitted to be in the Israelite camp, well, they could just be over there in the tumah camp, right? In the camp where all the people who are ritually impure. Not so. Actually, the ones who are to dwell in isolation outside the Israelite camp in the wilderness or outside of Jerusalem once we're ensconced in the land of Israel, it's not like they can all hang out together. The Mitzorah, he has some spiritual work to do, and so he needs to be isolated from everyone else, even the other people who are impure. Yes, he shall dwell in isolation indicates that he shall dwell alone, meaning even other ritually impure people, such as the Zavin and those who are ritually impure due to contact with a corpse, should not dwell with him. One might have thought that Zavin, the man with gonorrhea, and those who are ritually impure due to contact with a corpse, they're sent to one camp, meaning that the laws governing which camps they may or may not enter are the same for both. Therefore, the verse states, both male and female shall you send out, outside the camp shall you send them out, and they shall defile not their camps in the midst of which I dwell. That's Numbers 5:3. The plural term camps, where they have to go, they shall not defile their camps, teaches that there are multiple camps for those who are ritually impure, so that we give a camp for this one and a camp for that one. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Thus, in his opinion, there are three camps. One which a leper may not enter, one which a zav may not enter, and one which even someone ritually impure due to contact with a corpse may not enter. They'll argue a little bit more about exactly how they break down who goes where. And here it's worth mentioning that, let me just skip here and then I'll get to a little more explanation. The Gemara questions the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. We see from the discussion cited above that it was clear to Rabbi Shimon that the impurity of a zav is more, that's a man with gonorrhea and has a discharge, right, that renders him impure so that he can't enter the temple, he can't enter the Israelite camp, he can't bring an offering, he can't touch teruma, etc. So according to Rabbi Shimon, the tumah of a zav is more severe than one who is ritually impure due to contact with a corpse. And that the impurity of a leper is even more severe than that of a zav. Now, this contradicts the idea that we normally think that one who touches a corpse is the highest level of impurity. Here, Rabbi Shimon is saying, no, a zav is higher than the guy who touched a corpse, and the mitzora is even higher, is a higher level of impurity even than that. So what is the stringency of a zav over one who is ritually impure due to a corpse? That the impurity of the zav issues out from his own body, right? Somebody who touched a dead body, somebody who touched a corpse, that the corpse is the strongest source of tumah. But the one who touched it, he didn't do anything wrong, right? He probably was burying a dead body. He was doing actually the ultimate mitzvah, the ultimate kindness, the favor that cannot be returned by attending to the needs of the dead. The zav, well, who knows how he contracted his zava, but, if he has gonorrhea, that's on him. And the mitzora, right, which is a spiritual malady manifested in a physical way, that's even the most stringent, the highest level of impurity, at least according to Rabbi Shimon. So what is the stringency? So the impurity of the zav issues out of his own body rather than coming from an external source, as is the case when the impurity is contracted from a corpse. But on the contrary, it may be argued that the legal status of one who is ritually impure due to a corpse is more severe, as he requires sprinkling with the waters of purification, right? The water mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, he has to be sprinkled by that on his third and seventh day of his impurity. Then he immerses in the mikveh. Then at nightfall, he's finally clear of that severe tumah of touching a corpse. This is not the case for the zav. On the days of he's sprinkled on the third and seventh days of his purification process, whereas a zav, who is also impure for 7 days, nevertheless does not require that sprinkling. I'm almost done, so if you've got questions and comments, please put them there in the comments. I'm just going to read one note from Rav Steinsaltz and then the law on this question. So the levels of ritual impurity. There is no single criterion that can be used to determine the relative severity of the different sources of ritual impurity. Indeed, each source of impurity has its own set of severities, stringencies, and leniencies. An almost complete list of the factors that can cause ritual impurity is found in the first chapter of Tractate Kelim, from contact with creeping animals, which is the most lenient source of impurity, to a corpse, which is considered the most severe source of impurity. And there is a similar list of the 10 types of ritual impurity due to bodily emissions, which differs slightly in its order from the first list. The different sources of impurity can be ranked in accordance with the power that they have to impart impurity to others. They can also be ordered in accordance with the manners in which they impart impurity to others. For example, a man suffering from gonorrhea, a zav, imparts his tumah, his ritual impurity, to objects that he causes to move, even if he didn't touch them. But if he causes an object to move, he imparts his impurity to it, right? It's like as if, there was an object like a pot of food at one end of a seesaw, and the Zav pushed down at the other end of the seesaw, like he didn't come anywhere near it, but he caused it to move, and the Torah mandates that he would impart his impurity to what was on the other end of that seesaw. That is a stringency of the Zav. That's not a stringency of other kinds of tumah. That imparts impurity to objects that cause to move. And a Mitzorah imparts impurity to objects found in the same enclosure with him. The sources of impurity can also be arranged based on the measure, the minimum measure that you come into contact with that is required in order to impart that impurity. Consequently, it is difficult, nay impossible, to state absolutely that one type of tumah is more severe than another type. And finally, the law on the questions raised on this page, a camp for this one and a camp for that one. Anyone who is ritually impure is prohibited from entering the temple, which is the camp of the divine presence, analogous to the tabernacle in the wilderness. A zav, a zava, a menstruating woman, and a woman after childbirth may not enter the Levite camp, which is analogous to the Temple Mount. A Metzorah is excluded from all three camps, which means that he may not enter Jerusalem, as stated in the Gemara. Okay, that's what I've got from this material today. Let me go to your questions and comments. Okay. Nina says, I can see comments. Good. Do you have any questions or comments? They're not printed here. Let me reload. We're just having technical difficulties here. I'm not sure what's going on. Nina, I see your note that you can see comments, but perhaps nobody had any questions or comments. I'll just wait one moment to see if anything comes in, because, when I speak, you guys hear me about anywhere from 12 to 20 seconds after I've actually spoken. Nina's saying, sorry, problem. She's having problems also. Okay, so Lucy has a question. Did menstruating women have to stay outside the camp? What happened to their children then? Well, as we saw, in terms of menstruating women, they may not enter the Levite camp, right? So the Levite camp is already the camp where they are in service of the tabernacle. And so this is analogous to the Temple Mount, right? So a menstruating woman should not go up on the Temple Mount, but she doesn't have to leave the general encampment of Israel. That is in terms of the levels of tumah, that's not such a high level. A man who would have marital relations with a menstruating woman, like he's actually he's in worse shape. You know what I mean? Like he has a higher level of impurity than she would. I'm pretty sure about that, although we haven't discussed that. But that is something that's one of the few areas where this is still around, right? So in terms of observant Jews, during the week of the wife's menses, so they're not going to come into contact. It's not just that they won't have marital relations. They're not even going to hold hands. They're not going to come into contact with each other at all. And then she'll observe 7 clean days after her flow has ended. And then she gets to go to the mikvah. And I really say she gets to go, there's like men's mikvah. But men are not commanded to immerse in mikvah. That's more of like a Hasidic custom. Some men do it once a week, just before Shabbos. Some just once a year, before certain holidays. Some men do it every day in the Hasidic community, but in no case do they do it with a bracha, because men are not obligated to immerse in the mikvah, and so they don't say a blessing when they do it. The only exception to that is a convert. So one who converts to Judaism, whether male or female, he or she must immerse in the mikvah, and so they say the blessing when they immerse in the mikvah. And the mikvahs that are used for conversion and for women are usually pretty beautiful. Like not everywhere, not all the time, but very often they're like a beautiful spa type of arrangement. Whereas a men's mikvah, like for example, when you go to Uman, where 80,000 men go to observe Rosh Hashanah in Uman, not this past year because of COVID, but normally. So there's a lot of men's mikvahs there, and you just want to get in and out. you want to immerse because it's a custom to immerse every day for the people who go to Uman, but it's not a beautiful spa type of situation for the most part. And I can't speak for women, but from what I've read and what I've heard, it can be a very beautiful experience. And just even the men's mikvah, this idea that you remove all interpositions from your skin, you're in your birthday suit and you immerse in that water, and there's this feeling of coming out, purified. I mean, certainly women and converts who go in the mikvah, they change their state, right? They change their state from prohibited to permitted after they've immersed. Men doing mikvah, it's just a little bit more of a custom and not fulfilling an obligation. That seems to be the only question that was asked today. So hopefully we won't have these technical difficulties tomorrow, and I can see the comments and welcome everybody, in what city you're from, etc. I enjoy doing that at the beginning of class. I don't even know if I said at the beginning today that song was a great song. It was Ani Lo Yodea, I Don't Know, by Joey Newcomb. And finally, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific, we're going to be doing, the first time we're doing it, first time for us that we're doing it, a Tu B'Shvat Seder. So it's a Kabbalistic Seder meant to really focus our attention and our gratitude for the fruit of the trees, right? So right now we're in Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of the Hebrew month of Shvat. This holiday has Talmudic significance because it's considered the Rosh Hashanah, the new year of the trees. On this date, a second-year tree becomes a third-year tree. But really, it has a deeper mystical significance, and we'll be discussing that tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific during our first annual Tu B'Shvat Seder. All the best. Have